On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, it's crossover day as myself and Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers hooked up to talk about OG Anunoby and whether or not there actually might be a fit there on a trade package between Toronto and Portland. We dig into why the Raptors are not exactly compelled to move on from OG or a player of his ilk right now. We'll talk about why the Blazers maybe shouldn't cash all their chips for someone like OG as well. It's a really good episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. It's all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1197 of Locked On Raptors for Friday, June the 17th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors, where you can find links to every single episode of the podcast. And you can also subscribe, follow, rate, review the podcast and all your favorite podcast apps for the low, low price of On the House. You can also go to YouTube and hit the big red subscribe button and support the show over there as well to see it on video every day. And for those who are listening, watching today, you're getting a fun one. It is Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers with me, a former guest of the show. We've done a couple crossovers with Mike in the past. Well, once after the Gary Trent Jr. Norman Powell trade, for example. And we talked about OG Anunoby and the rumors swirling around about how the Blazers are prioritizing him, really trying to get him in the door, whereas the Raptors, maybe you're not super compelled to go and move on from their very good 6'8", 3-and-D defensive wonderkind. So that's what's on today's episode. We dig into all the different elements of it, why it might work, what would get the Raptors to budge perhaps, and of course, why I don't think it's actually going to happen. Kind of breaking some hearts of Blazers fans out there today, if I am being honest, but it's a good show. And we hope you enjoy it. Also, apologies for the weird lighting situation that I have going on. You'll see what I'm talking about. We recorded this episode at like 7 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, which means that the light was just blaring in through the window that's behind me here and was backlighting me as though I were some sort of deity. So it's weird, but the episode sounds good and looks, we comment on it, have some fun with it at least. But just if you're thrown off by the strange lighting situation, that's what was going on. All right, let's get to it now. My chat with Mike Richman from Locked On Blazers, talking OG, Anfernee Simons, Josh Hart, Nassir Little, all of that and everything else around the OG rumor mill. That's all with Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers coming up right now. Hey, Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors with Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers here to talk about all those OG Anunoby rumors that have been flying around for what seems like months, Mike. Oh my God, it just doesn't stop. First off, thanks for being here, man. How are things out there in PDX? I don't think they're as sunny as they are here in just the western outskirts of Toronto. As for those watching on video, we're recording this at a time that is, conducive to a Pacific timer's schedule. And as it turns out, I often don't record the podcast at this time and didn't realize the sun just billows in through this window that I don't have a shade for. So you're just going to have to deal with me looking like a Greek god sent from Olympus here talking about basketball on the podcast. And it'll just be a thing that the YouTube viewers get to laugh at, I suppose. How are you, man?
I'm good. You beat me to my sunshine joke. It's been brutal here weather-wise, so I was gonna make a similar joke. I guess this is, if you are an audio listener, if you're a podcast listener, this is maybe some encouragement to check out the YouTube channel, either Locked On Raptors or Locked On Blazers, because Sean really is getting blasted by the sun. Mother Gaia has really cursed him, but we'll get through it. We can talk about trade rumors that have bothered you, and that'll probably make it a little cloudier in your parts.
The problem here is I'm getting married in 6 weeks, and if I get like a half-face sunburn from this situation here, it's not going to look good in the pictures. So I might have to keep an eye on that and perhaps invest in some sunscreen mid-pod. Either way, OG Anunoby, Mike, is a guy who his name has been out there. I don't really know where it's coming from. To me, from that original piece from Jake Fisher, what seems like months ago, but was just a couple weeks back, the suggestion there mostly seems that outside forces from Toronto are kind of looking at Toronto and saying, hey, look at all those guys they have who are 6'8" and 6'9". They can't possibly have enough ball to go around for all of them, can they? They must have to trade one of them, and OG is kind of the logical one. He makes a very reasonable contract. He is not necessarily on the same star tier as Pascal Siakam is right now, or Scotty Barnes figures to be, so I understand why those from sort of the outside looking at the Raptors and the way they've built their roster in this unorthodox way would say, hey, maybe OG's gettable. I have my own thoughts on that, but what's the sort of thought in Portland right now? Like, is it actually something that Blazers fans are talking themselves into? Is there any intel that you might have from your end of things to suggest that the Blazers are super pursuing OG Anunoby as a potential pairing with Damian Lillard on this sort of blank slate canvas roster they seem to have this year?
Yeah, they've got a real we'll call it an opportunity this summer to reshape the roster. They've got a lot of opportunities ahead of them. Yeah, I mean, there's been some reporting, not just from Jake Fisher of Bleach Report, who I believe was the first to put it on wax, but some others around, including Mark Stein of ESPN and the Ringer's Kevin O'Connor, who have all kind of floated this, right? Is that the Blazers are pursuing OG Anunoby. And I think Fisher pointed out really well. It seems to be all of the folks outside of the pressure seems to be coming from outside of the Raptors organization. But the sort of basics of it from a Blazers side makes sense. OG Anunoby is really good and at a position of need and in theory gettable. And I want to ask you about the gettableness in a second, but just from a Blazers perspective, they've got the number 7 overall pick in the NBA draft. They have a large traded player exception that would allow them to take in OG Anunoby without making the salary match perfectly, so they could give back some spare parts, or Josh Hart, who's probably better than a spare part, but that is kind of, they have relatively limited assets to offer, and OG Anunoby seems to be, if not their number one target, because that may have moved to now DeAndre Ayton, they're a huge target because they're chasing big fish. And I think this is an important thing to point out. Trades come about because teams want certain things. We saw a trade last night in the NBA in which a team wants to play young players and be bad, the Houston Rockets. And so they give up a pretty good player for not much in Christian Wood for the 26th overall pick and some literal spare parts, with all due respect to Trey Burke and Boban. And Marquise Chris. I'll apologize to everybody in the trade. And Sterling Brown. Also, sorry to Sterling Brown. Sorry to all four.
So many dudes just catching strays from Mike here.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
But the Rockets are specifically motivated to clear the room for young players, et cetera, et cetera. The Blazers are, and I think the Raptors in the same boat, they are motivated to be good. And that is where I think we get into the problem. And that's what I want to ask you. Like, the perception from the outside, or at least what's being pushed, quite frankly, probably from people's agents from the outside, is that OG is gettable. Yeah. Why or why not is OG? Why is OG not gettable? Let me pose it to you like that.
I would say he's not gettable because he's the exact type of player the Raptors seem to be building their whole team around, right? At the end of the Raptors season, Masai Ujiri had a press conference. He was asked about OG. He was asked about a lot of guys, and he said, we love OG. OG's great. He was asked about Precious Achiuwa, same idea, guys who are 6'8", 6'9". And he said, like, if we could have 15 of those guys, we would. And I think it's pretty clear from the way the Raptors have oriented their lineups, the way their roster outside of Gary Trent Jr., Malachi Flynn, and Fred VanVleet is comprised entirely of guys between 6'7" and 6'9", who are switchable defensively, who have a little bit of off the dribble pop, stuff like that. Like, there's a very clear vision here the Raptors are going for. And you can disagree with whether you think the vision makes sense or not to go and play basketball in a kind of new way where they've kind of punted the center position and in a lot of ways have kind of punted other positions as well. And it's like, yeah, sure, Thad Young's a shooting guard and Chris Boucher's a 4, and who cares? It doesn't matter. It's all just make-believe. You can argue with whether you think that's the right move or not, but I would say that if you look around the NBA, and specifically in the NBA Finals, the Raptors are collecting the types of players that play deep into the postseason. And I think for the Raptors, if they're, they've already got OG Anunoby in the door, why would you then go trade him for a guy who doesn't fit that bill when you've had your sort of stated mission being, we're going to collect as many of these guys as possible? Look, I think in a world where there's an offer that comes in that they can't refuse, of course they take it, because that's what Masai Ujiri does. This dude traded away DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard, hoping maybe he would play for a year, and he did, and it all worked out very well. But that was a big risk at the time, and there was no certainty to it for sure. And that was a franchise icon who everybody loved, and people were still mad about it after the trade happened. that he fired Dwayne Casey after he won Coach of the Year. Like, he's been pretty shrewd, and we should lump Bobby Webster in this as well. Like, they're sort of one and the same at this point. I know Masai gets all the plaudits, but Bobby Webster is the day-to-day guy running the show. And, I think if there were a move out there where it was like a no-brainer, obviously this makes our team better both now and in the future, then yeah, OG's gettable, and he's an easily moved guy because he makes 17 million bucks or whatever. It's a very easily matchable salary for most teams. It's not like you're trying to move Russell Westbrook's contract or anything like that. And so, yeah, there's a world in which it's possible that they would move on from him, but I've said all along, I don't think the Raptors are trading OG Anunoby unless they're getting in return a player who makes it so they no longer miss OG Anunoby. And it's like, okay, OG's gone, but oh my God, did you see the guy that got in exchange for him? And for me, that's where the Blazers thing kind of dries up a little bit. As much as the 7th pick is nice, the Raptors kind of already got their good draft luck with Scotty Barnes. I don't know if they really need to go and try to score another guy in the top 10 of a draft that's not as strong as last year's was. And then you're getting into the Josh Harts and whoever else might come the other way. And I think that leaves the Raptors with, yes, another pick to add to the coffers and all of that, but I think it leaves them kind of a little bit further away from their stated goal of amassing all of these types of players to build their roster with.
Before we let's talk specifically about the package, right? I want to talk about that. We can talk about that a little later, but first, there is a notion that OG wants a larger role. Sure. And let me just parse this out with you because I believe I read this in The Athletic. Eric Koreen yesterday, Wednesday, June 15th, we'll call it.
What is time? Sure. Yeah. Yesterday, 4 weeks ago.
I don't know.
Who's to say?
I don't know when you're listening to this, dear listener, or watching this. And if you're watching this, Sean's just even sunnier by the minute. But it's Eric wrote a really interesting piece that talked about kind of just the general sort of usage rate of a guy like OG. Just how much he gets to do. And I think that's kind of the reason why people are like, oh, maybe they pry him free because he wants to do more. And when Pascal Siakam was hurt at the beginning of last year, he got to do more. But he seems to me, and this is just sort of to advocate for the devil or advocate for various agents around the NBA who don't represent the Raptors specifically, like there is some truth to OG kind of not being able to graduate out of 4th option in Toronto.
Sure.
Would you agree with that? That it's Pascal and it's Fred and it's eventually Scotty Barnes. And then it's OG, and then like if you put Gary Trent Jr. on the floor, he's just going to shoot it every time he touches it, so you don't get to use those. You don't get to use those possessions anyways. So like, would you agree or concede that there is sort of a limited role or a ceiling on OG's role in Toronto?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair that there's probably a ceiling on, is he going to be a 25% usage guy ever?
Right.
No, the Raptors only had one of those guys last season. It was Pascal Siakam. He had a 25.8 usage percentage. So it's not like this is a team that is ever going to have one guy, I think, that is sort of the clear, all right, clear out. He's going to have a 30% usage and lead the way. And I don't think they're ever going to be like the Celtics either, right? Where you got 2 guys who are 30% usage guys and the rest are just kind of catching and shooting around them. This is a team that is pretty egalitarian. And, you think about what they did in crunch time this season, for example. That was actually like a feature, not a bug. They were a really good crunch time team because guess what? They have 5 dudes on the floor at all times who could burn you if you sold out too much for Pascal Siakam or you trapped Fred VanVleet at the top of the pick and roll. Or you jumped out too far in a Gary Trent Jr. catch and shoot. They had guys who could burn you everywhere, and it felt like different guys at different points were getting their moments in the sun to go and be the hero in a given game. And there are injuries and there are things that happen over the course of the season where guys go out. And I think for me, just reading through the tea leaves and stuff, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of agitation going on right now, just from what I'm seeing and reading, right? OG, certainly, I could understand if there was some behind the scenes, like, I could use a little bit higher of a role or whatever. He had like a 20% usage this season. It's not like he's not getting used. It's not like his rookie season where he just stood in the corner and took like 2 threes a game and defended all the time. Like, he's got a bigger role than that. They started to use him as a post-up option and things like that this season. Like, they do find sets to use him. But ultimately, if you're trying to win, I don't know if you want OG having a 25% usage, right?
Yeah,
and I guess that
think
depends.
There's some truth to that for sure.
Yeah, and I guess it totally depends on like what he wants, what he sees for himself, and all of that. But I think it's one of those situations where it's like, are you sure the greener pastures are where you want to go? And Eric Koreen pointed out, like, Jeremy Grant is an example, sort of a corollary, right? Like a perfect piece on that Denver team goes to Detroit and is overextended on a team that doesn't win a whole lot. And for a guy like OG, like, if he goes to Portland and is the number 2 option, I'm sorry to Blazers fans. As much as I love OG Anunoby, I don't think that's a recipe getting you anywhere significant in what's going to be a loaded Western Conference next season, because he's proven in fits and starts, he's had some moments here and there with shot creation, but he's a bit of a weird ball handler. He's kind of off balance. He's got a bit of a quirky sort of way about moving, and he's proven that he's just way better as like an opportunistic third or fourth option who can play off of other guys, cut, hit threes, post up when he needs to, and be like a 60% usage or is true shooting guy when he's in those spots where his looks are pretty easy. He's very good at finding them for himself. So yeah, there might be some reason for agitation just because there are a lot of mouths to feed with the Raptors, but I also think with the way that they kind of spread it around, it's, pretty limited in terms of no one's getting totally shut out. OG averaged 17 a game this past season. It's not like he's sitting there averaging 12 a game thinking, damn, if only I had my own team.
Right.
I don't think it's quite that extreme. We should continue this forward and talk a little bit more about just what the package might look like if something is to come to fruition. But before we do that, I should tell you about our pals over at betonline.net. They are your number one source for all your sports betting stats and info. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, otherwise known as the NBA Finals. You got the Stanley Cup Finals going on right now, too, which is, God, the best thing in sports. Game 1 was just an absolute banger. Go watch and bet on hockey. You got baseball, of course, and the fighting news from the MMA, UFC, etc. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, so you can be the informed wagerer instead of me just indiscriminately clicking on stuff and putting money down the tubes. Go and be the smart bettor. Go be informed before you lay your money down. Head to the website today, your usual mobile device, to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. So, Mike, I think you were going to throw something at me at the end of that thing about the usage and stuff. Take it away, sir.
Well, first of all, if OG is on the Portland Trail Blazers and they still have Anfernee Simons and Damian Lillard, he is the third option on offense. Right. They are not going to. Anfernee Simons' thing that he does best is go get a bucket. They are not going to say, okay, you kind of stand over here and let OG Anunoby figure it out. His role is something like that. And I think the best version of OG Anunoby is something akin to what Andrew Wiggins is, right? That he's a low usage guy during the regular season. And then in high leverage moments, he's like, okay, I can do more. Do more, but you don't get to necessarily do that for the first 90 games. It's just when it really matters, your skill set and your size and your versatility and all those things that OG brings to the table, they really end up mattering more in those big moments.
And he has been an absolute monster in the playoffs before.
Absolutely.
And has gotten plenty of usage. I think he might have led the team in usage in the postseason this year. So
and then some of that is by choice, right? Is they're like, let's make it be OG. Let's get the ball out of Pascal's hands and make it be OG, right? And if he was really punishing teams and he's 24 and can take a big step forward, then it would be a little bit different. I think he's really good. I want to be clear. I think he's really good, but I also think he probably tops out as a third option on offense. He might not. He might think a little bit different. And I don't. If I'm apologizing to Sterling Brown and Boban, I'll also apologize to OG. You could be whatever you want, young king. Spread your wings. Let's talk about the package. I want you to be Bobby Webster for a moment, and don't hang up, okay? Please don't hang up the call. So what the Blazers can't really offer Anfernee Simons and Jusuf Nurkic until after the draft. So let's assume that it's the draft, and then if you reject that, then we'll move forward into another part of it. But at the draft, the Blazers can offer some combination of the number 7 overall pick and Josh Hart and or Nassir Little, although I think they wouldn't include both because they're so limited depth-wise. Nassir Little is worse than Josh Hart, but maybe fits the Raptors' plan a little bit better. If it is, let's say, Hart, number 7, and a future something, lottery-protected, blah, 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 first-round pick of some flavor, how far do you go in entertaining the conversation?
I mean, I think you probably think about it if you're the Raptors, just because, the seventh overall pick in the draft is not nothing. And if there's a guy there who you kind of envision as being someone you can pair with Scotty Barnes going forward and have that sort of second wave of, core guys behind the Siakam and Fred duo, that's great. But also OG's 24, 25. Like, he also kind of fits the timeline very well.
Right.
So I don't think they're not in a position where they need to alter their timeline at all. They have just a very good complement of guys kind of spanning across an 8-year time frame. And I kind of think the whole concept of, everyone should be the same age on a team is kind of silly anyway.
It's nonsense.
Right?
It's nonsense.
Yeah.
You always have a 2.5-year window. So you're just cycling through each 2.5-year window. And even then you might have less. So yeah, I'm with you on the timeline thing is nonsense.
Sam Presti, are you listening? Sam Presti, are
Sam,
you there? Yeah.
I mean, just for instance, look at the Celtics, right? You know how their timeline was extended? They got 37-year-old Al Horford back. That's how he helped out the 20-year-olds, because what you need is talent. So I don't buy it. Although the Celtics do look like they're going to be good for a little while, to be sure.
It makes me very, very angry. I don't care for it at all. I think they should try to do the Thunder thing. If anyone should do it, it's them.
Tear it down.
You can't win the title. You lose tonight. You've proven you can't win the title with this core. Obviously, you have to tear it down and start all over again to build a title team. But enough Celtics denigration.
Specifically, so that package, you would consider it. What would stop you short of saying yes?
Truthfully, the contract situation, right? Like Josh Hart, what's his situation again? Next year, he
is fully non-guaranteed this year,
right?
But he's good, and he's a $13 million contract, so you're going to pick it up, and then again fully non-guaranteed the season after. So it's really good for the team, but it's not. OG has an extra season at a little bit more money, and he's better and younger. So
yeah. That the contract I think is a little different there. Yeah, he's obviously better than Josh Hart as well, does more. And I think it needs to be said, OG is one of, if not the best wing defenders alive.
His peak is first team all defense for sure. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Could be a first team all defense defender.
Should have been an all-defense player back in 2019-20 when the Raptors had the number 2 defense in the league and were the talk of the NBA for what they were doing on defense and the subject of many a think piece, and yet had no one get voted to either first or second team, which made no sense. OG was the best defender on that team. You could maybe give it to Marc Gasol, but he missed some time. He's really, really, really good on that end. He is the guy who they'll throw on Trae Young to shut him down, or Damian Lillard to shut him down. They'll throw him on Nikola Jokic, and he's been one of the best Jokic defenders over the last 2 seasons. He's a monster. I feel like he kind of gets, because the Raptors, won the title without him playing at all, because he had an appendectomy and missed the whole postseason, and because he's been on a Raptors team the last couple seasons that lost Kawhi, so everyone kind of lost interest, and then they were in Tampa. I think he kind of gets slept on as how great a defender he is. I feel like if you swapped him and Mikal Bridges, there would be no difference whatsoever between what you see for the Suns. It might even be a little bit more potent defensively because OG can actually capably guard 1 through 5 in a way that I don't think Bridges quite has the beef to.
I would say Bridges is better getting around screens, but OG's just so thick. He's just a huge dude.
He's so strong. Pound for pound, one of the strongest players alive. And he's also a knockdown 40% three-point shooter. So it should be said, if your GM isn't interested in OG, your GM's an idiot. You should want him. Everyone should be calling the Raptors about him. He's that good.
I think that's a good point, right? It's one of the reasons that you don't take the Blazers trade is not just what it is. Say 7 is Shaedon Sharpe, right? And the Raptors are enamored with this mystery box player who could turn into a superstar, right?
Sure.
The reason that you don't take something that looks like Shaedon Sharpe and Josh Hart is because OG Anunoby is a winning player that every good team is going to want. And you don't need to make a decision in the next 7 days. You could probably hold out and get a darn good package into the future if it does come up where OG is not just potentially wanting out, but actively asking out. If Rich Paul is going on and get OG out of Toronto, that's how Rich Paul talks. That's a pitch perfect Rich Paul impression. But if something akin to that, right? Because he's a winning type player. I think the holdup with the Blazers package is that if Toronto really wants to do this, they can just shop him around and probably get something better.
Should be noted, Dan Tolzman, who is in the Raptors front office, was asked about.
Oh, I love this.
Could you get someone better than OG Anunoby with the 7th pick? And he was like, I don't think so. Like, it's probably not. It would be very hard.
He was
to
like,
do
probably
so.
not the way OG is trending. And I think to me, I think that's true. Like, I think that is spot on. You probably couldn't get a player better than OG Anunoby. Mm-hmm. The Blazers should have just drafted him in 2017.
Everyone should have drafted him in 2017. By the way, like, ridiculous that he fell to 24.
You think he's worse than Josh Jackson?
He got drafted behind TJ Leaf, I think. Like, man.
Yeah, the 2017 draft is a mess. The 2017 draft is truly a mess. Shout out to Jason Tatum and De'Aaron Fox, and beloved Markelle Fultz. Okay, so I think the other like pitch for why you move on from OG, and this is why, like, so I'm back on the phone, I'm calling Bobby back, and I'm like, hey, hold on, here's what you need though, is that the Raptors could use a little more half-court shot creation.
Sure.
And I think the sell is that Josh Hart, if nothing else, can get his ass to the rim. He can get downhill. He's a really good straight line driver. Do you think obviously he doesn't have a lot of other juice. He's a pretty good passer, but like if you just look at his numbers with the Blazers, Josh Hart was insane. So larger sample size, but he played 13 games for the Blazers and he was bonkers. I think that's the sell. And I wanted to tell you this, Sean. On my end, on Locked On Blazers, when I say Josh Hart and 7 for OG Anunoby, my listeners say that it is a just wild overpay.
I love trades. They're the best. Yeah. This is always what happens.
It is a wild. So from I will literally, I'm going to post this on my feed. Thanks for listening, y'all. And people are going to comment on the YouTube channel, and they're going to email me, and they're going to say, this is a wild overpay. Why would you do that? You're stupid. Beyond like, when I pitched this to you, let's talk about our mock draft. I called you on mock draft night. What would you want more from the Blazers if the Josh Hart and 7 package doesn't do it? Just theoretically, we don't need to talk like cap legal.
Sure. I mean, I should say, like, I think Josh Hart rocks as well. Like, he's a guy who wanted the Raptors to go try to get at the deadline from the Blazers last year when it was clear the Blazers were trying to tank it out. I thought, hey, go try to poach Josh Hart out of Portland. That would be an absolute coup if you could do that. Right. So I think he's awesome. Where I kind of, where it falls a little flat for me is, okay, you can get downhill, but like, are you putting the ball in his hands over Fred VanVleet or Pascal Siakam or Scotty Barnes? Probably
right. He's
not.
A second side guy. Exactly. He's your fourth option. Yeah.
And like, does he help you maybe move Gary Trent Jr. to the bench to fulfill his 6-man destiny? Probably. That's not a bad thing, but you can also get that just by playing OG as your 2 guard in like massive super duper lineups with Precious Achiuwa playing the 5, and you can still accomplish that. And so I just feel like the swapping out of skills, you're getting a little bit more downhill, rim pressure, I suppose, but Scotty Barnes, very good at getting to the rim. Pascal Siakam gets to the rim all the time as well and is a good finisher around there too. It'd be nice to get that, but, I just don't know if it's enough in terms of like trading off the defense and the dead-eye shooting you get from OG to bring in that element that Hart has that maybe OG has kind of struggled with. And again, OG can get to the rim too. You can post him up and he's going to, just move over anybody who's trying to guard him basically. So, I don't think it's like that big a concern. Where, you can start really sort of interesting me is, I think some Raptors fans are infatuated with Anfernee Simons, and you mentioned the sort of weird legality of trading him. I don't really know where I come down on Simons. I kind of feel like, is he just kind of younger, shinier CJ McCollum, which is a good player for sure.
Yeah, it's a really good basketball player,
really
exactly.
Excellent player, but not exactly the type of player the Raptors, again, are kind of prioritizing what they're doing here. And like, this is a team that's going to run their stuff through Pascal and Scotty next season. Like, this is going to be 2 6'9" dudes going to work with everyone else kind of in their orbit, is at least how I'm viewing this team. And I don't think trading OG for an Anfernee Simons does that either. But if you're talking like Simons and Little or something like that, and you throw in the pick, then sure, I'm sure the Raptors are looking at that long and hard. But then again, I'm sure on the other side, Blazers fans are like, what are you talking about? Who is this moron with terrible lighting from his back with his stupid recording studio that's not blacked out saying these insane things on a podcast? He's a total moron. So I totally get it.
I think the Blazers pitch would be straight up Ant for OG, and I think not even just fans. I think that would the front office also values Anfernee Simons that highly.
Sure.
Would be my assumption, and I think paying Anfernee Simons somewhere in the range of like just shy of 20 million is very reasonable. I think he's going to get something like 4 for 80 this summer, and I think he is capable of outperforming that contract because he's that good on offense. He doesn't fit exactly the Raptors' plan. He would nail their sort of need for another shot creator because he can really go score on his own. But he's not a good defensive player. And the Raptors, the worst defensive player they regularly play is Gary Trent Jr. That's kind of their thing is like we only plus defenders. And Trent, for his defense limitations, is a great at forcing turnovers and goes hard and is bigger, longer, stronger than Ant is. I think,
and I also just don't think the Raptors are itching to get back to a world where they were playing small ball lineups in a postseason series with Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry, Norm Powell, and they were so small. They were tiny, just like teensy weensy, like Norm Powell at the 3. It just, I don't think they're itching to go back to that world now that they've seen what life can be like when everybody's 6'9".
Yeah. So, and like the sign and trade stuff, like you can't really trade 7 with a sign and trade because if you agree to it on draft night, you have to wait 2 weeks before the sign and trade, and Simons's people would have to agree with the Raptors, so you have to kind of keep it under wraps and then not sign.
Seems like a lot of illegality and tampering.
Right, like I think technically you could do it, like technically you could pull it off, but it's just it would take a lot of not tampering. It would take a lot of effort to not tamper, and I don't think either side could necessarily could pull it off. It just seems really unlikely. So if you're talking about trading for Ant, or if the other guy I want to mention before we get out of here is Nurk, the Raptors from the outside need, quote unquote, a center. Does Jusuf Nurkic have any appeal to you as a fan, and then maybe from what you think the Raptors might do?
No, I think Nurk is good, but I've said this all along as like DeAndre Ayton rumors have swirled and Rudy Gobert. I don't think the Gobert thing even really works because it's just too difficult to make work matching the money wise. You're giving up way too much, and you end up being a team who has no shooting and is only defense and Rudy Gobert. So I don't think that really even holds any water. But my whole thing with the center situation with the Raptors has been I don't think they're going to devote a ton of resources to that spot unless it's like a no-brainer Karl Anthony Towns or better type superstar, because I think they've sold themselves on the idea that they don't need to do that to be really good. Look at the teams again in the NBA right now who are going on deep runs. There's no superstar center out there who is like, the center of the world for any of these teams. And I think the Raptors are looking at that and saying, yeah, like we are going to follow that model here because we don't need to devote all these resources. And if the time comes along where we need to find someone for a specific matchup, say Joel Embiid, for example, then that's something we can go and figure out at a deadline or something like that, the way they did with Marc Gasol back in 2019. Right. And I also think like Precious Achiuwa is good enough defensively and showed enough flashes last season that they're just happy to let him roll with the starting job right now just to see what he can do. And I just think Nurkic, like you would bring him in, he would be in front of Achiuwa. He doesn't really fit the scheme defensively whatsoever. And I think it would be a little bit too stodgy and clunky with him doing his sort of big post-up thing within what the Raptors do with not a lot of space being provided. It just doesn't quite check out to me. And yeah, I think the need for a center for the Raptors has been way more sort of projected onto them by people outside who are like, well, every team needs a center, right? And I think internally, like they'll make a move if something makes them obviously better. If they can swing a Gary Trent Jr. for DeAndre Ayton in a sign and trade, hell yeah, they're going to do that. But I think it's only going to come if it's a no-brainer deal where they get an obvious upgrade who fits what they're trying to do. And I don't think Nurkic really fits that either.
Yeah, I would agree that you don't trade a good player for a seeming need. I think they could just sign a center off the scrap heap. From the outside, I think that they could use a big person to foul out against Joel Embiid. I think that's
really all it is.
They need 18 minutes of a dude who can foul out against Joel Embiid, and then they can get to the other minutes of their better basketball players for the other 36 minutes they're on the court. I think that's or whatever the math is, the other minutes they're on the court. Like it's just they just need someone to foul out, and you can sign someone off the scrap heap. Like they should have kept Drew Eubanks. Honestly, they shouldn't have cut Drew Eubanks. They should have been like, Drew, welcome to the playoffs. You're going to play the first 6 minutes of each half. You're going to use all 6 fouls, and then you're going to go sit down and watch. And he would have said,
Joel Embiid is going to break your sternum. It's going
exactly.
to be the best.
He's going to, yeah. And if you want to elbow him in the face earlier on, that's cool. We're totally fine with it. Just kidding. It wasn't intentional. It was 2 pals. So last question, and then we can call it. We could say that we did a wonderful half hour on OG Anunoby. Does OG, not to the Blazers, does OG Anunoby get traded this summer? Period.
I don't think so. I think the Raptors are going to kind of hang tight here, let this thing marinate a little bit, and see what happens next season, where, it's also shouldn't be slept on. The Raptors got like very little time with all of these guys together last year between COVID absences, Pascal starting the season hurt. OG missed a lot of time. He only played like 47 games this season because of various injuries and COVID and all of that. And I just think they kind of want more time to see what this is all about. They're already ahead of schedule is the thing. Like Scotty Barnes being as good as he was to win Rookie of the Year when he was kind of seen as a project, like that has accelerated everything in the minds of, I think, outside observers. But I do think the Raptors are like, okay, this is awesome. We can be really good while we figure out what we have. That's great. Like, this is an awesome little luxury we have. But I don't think they're under any duress to go make some big franchise altering move just yet. I totally think they're a candidate at some point in the next couple of years to be a real consolidation team where, okay, there's a star who's upset somewhere. Let's put together 2 of our really good players on really good contracts and try to make something happen with all of our picks in store beyond this season. Like that, I could totally see, and I totally think OG would be top of the list of guys teams would want in that type of situation. I just don't think Josh Hart in the 7th pick is that. Like, I think it's OG's here. Josh Hart and the 7th are both kind of on this tier here. They're trading OG for someone on a higher tier for those watching. I'm doing a middle, higher, lower thingy for those who are just listening on audio. I don't think. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's right. I think you keep OG because you chase, like I said earlier in the show, like you keep OG because he's going to be coveted, and you're just not. There's no need to. There is no push for action right now from Toronto's side. There is a ton of impetus for the Blazers to make a move. They are going to trade the 7th pick next week for something. It's going to happen. It's just like I would bet that they don't either. If I had to bet, I bet OG is a Raptor on opening night because I think they have the luxury of patience, which they're among the very few in the league that can say that. But the clock will start ticking for the Raptors sometime around the trade deadline next year, and I think they can wait until February to figure out how loud it's ticking and what direction they want to go, and quite frankly, like, which star on the Utah Jazz is still around and eyeing greener pastures.
Yeah, for sure. I also, let me ask you sort of on the note of pressure, and to kind of go back to the original Josh Hart in the 7th, and then you mentioned Nassir Little as well. Are the Blazers under enough pressure from Damian Lillard that if the Raptors say the only way you're getting OG is if it's Josh Hart, 7, and Nassir Little, do they eventually say, all right, fine?
I gotta think no, because
they shouldn't. That would be dumb. They shouldn't.
Yeah, like I think no, because that's too big of an ask, and and that's like all of their ammunition for getting better. But not even specific to OG. Like, I just want, like, in general for like Blazer fans listening, I think they're going to be wildly aggressive in pursuit of veterans. So whatever that means, I don't think anyone not named Damian Ollie Lillard Sr. is safe. Like, I think they could sign and trade Nurk. I think they could sign and trade Ant. I think everyone in the back half of the roster is kind of bad, but like Josh Hart and Nassir Little, obviously
Caleb Swanigan, anybody?
He's out of the league. He's chilling.
I'm seeing him on their cap sheet right now. My bad.
No, it's been a minute since beloved Caleb was in the league. Like, they are going to be super aggressive. I don't think they do that. And I don't think OG is good enough that you sacrifice, like, he's a role player. He's a really good role player. He's an ideal role player, but I don't think you sacrifice 3 things for one thing to get a guy like OG. I think you try to cash in for something better, like Jeremy Grant.
Yeah.
To be clear, give me OG over Jeremy Grant 12 times out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I would advise the Blazers not to do that is the thing, right? Like, I
Right.
love OG Anunoby. I think he's fantastic. I don't think he's the guy you cash all your chips in for when
Right.
it's really your last chance to cash in chips to keep Damian Lillard happy and around, right? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like that would be a pretty doomed decision if they did say, yeah, have all the stuff, give us OG. That's our guy.
Yeah, exactly. The
Yeah.
Blazers should just take a rookie at 7 and get the pick right. Like,
Yeah.
in my opinion, keep what you have for the most part. Get the pick right. Use your traded player exception to get someone, and build with some responsibility. They're not going to do that. They don't listen. I mean, somebody listens. Someone on the team listens, but like they don't care. They have a different plan, and I'm fascinated over the next 7 days to see how that plan plays out.
And I'm fascinated to talk to you in a week's time when the trade has happened. OG's a Blazer, and we're all just
Exactly.
like laughing at how dumb
Exactly.
we are.
Yeah.
That feels like a good place to wrap this one up, Mike. This was a blast. Always love chatting with you. Everyone, go listen to Locked On Blazers, listen to Locked On Raptors, or whatever feed you're listening on. Go listen to the Counterpart feed and subscribe and all that good stuff. Mike, you're the absolute best. You're wonderful, and thank you for making us your very first listen of the day. I guess go make your second listen of the day. Whatever, if you didn't listen to Locked On Raptors,
Exactly.
like just make the other show your second listen of the day, and you're all set. With that, we'll round it out here. Thanks, Mike. Talk soon. Have a good one, everybody.
Appreciate you having me. Peace.